That's good.
Okay. Welcome to Let's Be Frank about the 5 dysfunctions of a team. That's what we're going to be chatting about today. And it's based on a book by Patrick Lencioni, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. A leadership fable, I believe is the subtitle.
Mm-hmm.
And we used the principle of the 5 dysfunctions of a team as a concept in our FitFo methodology, which we spoke about a couple of weeks ago. So we're going to just take you through what those 5 dysfunctions are and explain them in a little bit more detail.
Yeah, so it's one of those books that immediately when you read it, you feel like here's something that we can apply. And I think it has served us well. So let me just quickly run through the 5 dysfunctions.
Yeah.
So the very first dysfunction is absence of trust. The second one is the fear of conflict. The third is lack of commitment. The fourth is avoidance of accountability. And the fifth one is inattention to results.
Yeah. And they're all kind of based, so the shape of this is a pyramid and each one is based on the one before. So you kind of work your way up the pyramid as a team to achieve a good, well, they say you shouldn't have any of the 5 dysfunctions in a well-working team.
Yeah, and as you say, the bottom layer, the base of the pyramid starts with the absence of trust.
Yeah.
Because without trust, and we're specifically talking about vulnerability trust.
Yeah.
In other words, making yourself open or allowing yourself to show your team members that you are vulnerable.
Yeah.
That's owning up to your mistakes. That is acknowledging when you lack knowledge in any particular area.
Yeah.
That's what we mean by vulnerability trust. And it's extremely important for team members to trust each other.
Yeah. Well, that leads us into the next one, because if you don't have that trust, it leads to invulnerability, which then leads to the next one, which is a fear of conflict. If you're not able to be vulnerable with each other, you're unlikely to be comfortable disagreeing with one another.
Yeah, so Patrick Lencioni goes to great lengths to explain why he specifically uses conflict and not one of the toned down versions, so discourse or
like I said, disagreement.
Disagreement. Why he insists that we talk about conflict here. And conflict is something that doesn't necessarily have to be negative. It's about the pursuit of truth.
Yeah. Unfiltered, passionate debate in pursuit of the truth is the wording that he uses. Yeah.
Correct. And it's so important to get to that level where when we discuss anything as a team, how to approach something, exactly what it is that we have to do, that we are comfortable with disagreeing with each other.
Yeah.
Because that brings up the ideas. It allows us to get more ideas, to interrogate, to listen to other people's viewpoints, and through that get to the best possible solution or decision to move forward.
Yeah. And the way that we actually wrote this line in our FitFo methodology was, you must disagree for the good of the team. And I really like that must. It's not an option. You need to be able to speak to each other and disagree and have your point of view and talk about it in order to achieve that truth, the pursuit of the truth.
Yeah, I mean, there are some models or variations of this where it is actually suggested that somebody is assigned the role.
Devil's advocate.
The devil's advocate. Or that you go around the room and people must disagree with something, even if by and large you agree with the decision or with what's on the table, that you find something, you actively look for something to disagree about.
Yeah.
And I think that that's also a way to help people overcome their fear of conflict.
Yeah. Sorry, I need my notes.
It's not. It's definitely not about personalities. It is just about unfiltered,
passionate
debate to get to the truth.
Yeah. Okay. And so if you do have that fear of conflict in your team, after the absence of trust, that leads to artificial harmony. So everyone just agreeing on something that they might not actually believe in. And what that leads to is a lack of commitment, which is the next tier in the pyramid.
Yeah, correct. Because if you walk out of a discussion and you just agreed for the sake of agreeing, there's no real buy-in.
Yeah.
And we don't want that in our teams, and I don't think we can afford it. I think it's probably one of the things that lead to disengaged employees, and it's unnecessary.
Yeah. So we encourage commitment. I mean, we've spoken about it a bit before in previous podcasts, and it's so important that we get people to buy in, like you say. What did you say? If you don't weigh in, you don't buy in.
Yeah, if you don't weigh in, and that's Patrick Lencioni's way of putting it. If they don't weigh in, they don't buy in.
Yeah.
And we talk a lot about commitment. We, in our case, we often depend or rely on people making a commitment to a specific time frame that a piece of work will be completed in.
Yeah.
So I think that there are two parts to this lack of commitment. The one is that sits exactly in this hierarchy, or in the 5 dysfunctions of a team, in terms of not committing fully because they didn't fully agree with what was decided. They didn't weigh in, and therefore they don't commit. And the other is something which we're addressing on a different level, which is just about people's eternal optimism about how long a task is going to take, and then making a commitment which they can't deliver on.
Yeah. And they make it with the best intentions. It's
with the best intentions, but the knock-on effect of that is such that it is something that we have to address.
Yeah. So that lack of commitment leads to ambiguity, and ambiguity leads to an avoidance of accountability, tier number 4. And this is also something we've spoken about quite a bit in terms of FiveFriday and in terms of communication and things like that, the accountability.
Correct. So if you don't buy into what's going to be done, you already lack that commitment. And then, well, I'm not accountable. I didn't agree to that in the first place.
It's not my commitment, it's someone else's.
Correct. So it's an easy way out for people to then at that point say, well, I never agreed with that course of action or with that decision that was made. So that lack of accountability, we talk about that a lot in terms of the leader culture that we want to create, about team members holding each other accountable.
So we mentioned this a lot in our organogram podcast that we did, in the way that we have structured our teams. And the way Patrick Lencioni talks about it is that we must hold people accountable to their behaviors, because your behaviors become your habits. Or
correct.
I think that's the correct term that they use. So that from that we get low standards from a lack of accountability, because people are not proud of the work that they're producing, and then that leads to an inattention to results, which is the top of the tier, number 5.
Yes, and I think it's kind of self-explanatory, the way that as you go up with these 5 dysfunctions, that people will just assume that, well, I'm not responsible for the results. It's somebody else's problem, and they must deal with it. But we know, and I think people buy in to the concept of, well, we're all responsible for the successes or failures, whether it's a project or a division or team. But when we actually get to that point where we look at the results, because people didn't buy in, because they couldn't overcome their fear of conflict, and I think obviously at the very base level, the lack of trust in the team, people just feel that, well, the results not my responsibility.
And you can see how they all, like you say, how they've all built on each other. So you really need to start from the bottom and work on the trust first, and then move on to the fear of conflict and just get to that top tier. So where do you think FiveFriday sits on the pyramid?
Well, let's reverse that question, and you tell me where. I may be a little bit biased in terms of where we sit. Where do you think we sit?
Well, I also, and I've told you this before, is I think in different contexts we might be in different stages of the pyramid, and obviously you want to try and get to that perfect world where we're all perfectly comfortable with all 5 of the tiers, of overcoming all 5 of them. But I think in certain instances we are still struggling on some tiers. I do think that what we've definitely achieved is we've built that trust again in that bottom level, and we're busy with the fear of conflict, and you can see some people starting to speak up when they used to kind of be quiet about something they disagreed with and just accept whatever they were told. And you can really see that happening, and that also comes back to other principles in Offered for methodology, the challenging the status quo and speaking up. And so yeah, I think we're quite well on our way to overcoming the fear of conflict as a company.
Yeah, I agree with you. As you said, if we look at the context, and in some of our teams, we find that, well, we're there all the way, right up to the top. And in others, we're getting there. And it's extremely important to continuously make people aware of it.
Yeah.
In terms of where we are and how far we've come.
Yeah.
In terms of overcoming those 5 dysfunctions of a team. And it's very gratifying to find yourself in situations where you go, yes, we've had that breakthrough, or I'm seeing this consistently being part of the behavior.
Yeah.
So obviously, as you mentioned as well, we would like to be right there at the top and consistently perform like that.
Yeah.
But it is a process. We are dealing with human beings, people with lots of different personalities, and we know that it's going to take some time for all of them to get comfortable.
And that's also something that Patrick Lencioni mentions in the book, is that overcoming these dysfunctions is a deliberate action of each member of the team. You have to deliberately choose to overcome them and make that commitment and do it. So
definitely.
Yeah.
So we focus on the team and the importance of all of these dysfunctions to a team.
Yeah.
But a team's made up of individuals.
Yeah.
So it's important to point out, like you did, that it is the responsibility of everyone in the team to make that commitment.
Yeah.
Often you hear people say, well, I'm not going to trust you until I know that you trust me. It doesn't work like that. Trust is something that is earned, and in the wonderful video of Brené Brown, where she talks about the anatomy of trust, it's a very good explanation of trust is built by making yourself vulnerable.
Yeah. That brings us right back to the bottom of the pyramid, the vulnerability-based trust, and that's where we really have to start and focus on, and then build onto that.
But you raise a very important point in terms of the responsibility of each individual to buy into this and to actively commit to overcoming those 5 dysfunctions of a team.
Yeah. So, and I think it'll help to be talking about it like this, and to continue, as you said, we need to continue to remind people and keep speaking about these individual things. And I think you mentioned that one of the things we want to talk about is also fear of failure, which is a podcast coming soon, which we find a lot. And I think it ties into this, is that a lot of people are scared to make that commitment in case they fail.
Definitely.
Yeah.
We'll definitely chat about fear of failure or mistakes. I think it's sometimes incorrectly labeled as failure. It is the only way that we learn, and we'll definitely chat about that more. It's something that we consistently try and encourage, is for people to own up to their mistakes, so that we can all learn from them and improve. But commitment from every single member of the team is absolutely paramount.
Yeah. So with that being said, I mean, we'd like feedback from our own team and from anyone else who would like to give us feedback about how they think they're doing on the pyramid, and what we can do to encourage people to overcome these dysfunctions.
Please give us your feedback.
Yeah. So that was Let's Be Frank about the 5 dysfunctions of a team, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.